All right, well, welcome back, everyone. This is likely going to be our last part for our endocrine lecture. And what we're going to focus on here is we're going to look at the parathyroid glands, their function just very briefly, and then we're going to talk about just very generally some other structures that have an endocrine function, and then we will wrap up. So looking at the parathyroid gland, that is, uh, the parathyroid gland, so this term para typically means like beside or next to. So parathyroid glands are beside the thyroid. In reality, they're embedded within the thyroid gland itself, right? So here we're looking at kind of a posterior view of part of the pharynx. Here you see the thyroid gland tissue, so on either side with some blood vessels on this side, and these small little structures that I've highlighted here, and then there's one here on this right side, and then one more here. These are the parathyroid glands, right? So we usually have four, two on the left lobe and two on the right lobe. And what these are doing is these are responsible for producing a hormone called PTH, which is called parathyroid hormone, right? So it's really easy to remember parathyroid hormone. It comes from the parathyroid gland, specifically the chief cells or the principal cells, right? And what these are doing, what their main role is they are this hormone. This hormone is an antagonist to calcitonin that we talked about back whenever we did the thyroid, right? So we did thyroid, and then it produced calcitonin, right? Remember from the parafollicular cells or the C cells, it produced calcitonin, which helped to lower blood calcium, right? PTH, the antagonist, does the exact opposite. It increases blood calcium, right, through its effect on the bone, urine, and then calcitriol, which is active vitamin D, right? So if we look here, this is kind of a flow chart, if you will, that shows the effects of PTH, right? And so we have a low calcium level, right, high phosphate level maybe, and we begin to release PTH and secrete it from our parathyroid glands, right? So one thing it does is it goes to the kidney, and what this is saying here is it's essentially acting to increase calcium reabsorption, but also activate the production of vitamin D or calcitriol, right? And what that calcitriol does, what that activated vitamin D does, is it goes to the small intestine where it acts to promote the absorption of calcium in our diet, right? So things that we consume, to get that calcium, you have to have vitamin D, and PTH acts to promote the production of that vitamin D so we can absorb calcium and we can increase calcium levels. It can also act via the bone to um, to um, enhance calcium levels in the blood. So in other words, it will stimulate osteoclast activity, right? So by activating osteoclast, it's going to break down bone, release the calcium, and in that case, the calcium will be released into the bloodstream. Again, all of which is going to help to increase blood calcium levels. And then calcium itself is needed for a number of different functions, right? It's necessary for muscle contraction and nerve impulse conduction and blood clotting and bones themselves, right? It's an incredibly important ion, right? So what we're going to end here with is talking just briefly about some other structures that have an endocrine function, not focusing on any one for too long, but just touching on a few things that have some endocrine function, right? So first is the thymus. The thymus secretes what are called thymic hormones, and these are helping to produce and mature our T lymphocytes, or what are called our T cells, right? We also have our heart. The heart is going to produce something called ANP, which stands for atrial natriuretic peptide, and this is a hormone that whenever the heart itself is stretched, right? And you can imagine what may cause the heart to stretch. The heart's atria, the top chambers, maybe an increase in the amount of blood, right? So the blood volume, blood pressure. So by stretching the heart, this ANP is released, and the ANP acts on the kidney to help promote fluid loss, right? So promotes urination, which helps to decrease blood volume, which helps to decrease blood pressure as well, right? The kidney, we've alluded to the kidney a little bit when we did adrenal glands, but the kidney is going to produce something called EPO, or erythropoietin, And erythropoietin is secreted, produced and secreted in response to low blood oxygen levels, right? So in other words, this and what this name means, erythropoietin. Erythro means red, so this is referring to red blood cells, and then poietin or poetic is meaning to produce, right? So erythropoietin is stimulating the production of red blood cells, right? And so why would you need more red blood cells? Well, red blood cells contain hemoglobin. The hemoglobin contains an iron which binds oxygen, which allows oxygen to be transported and delivered to our various body tissues, right? So if we have a low blood oxygen level, right, or say we're in an environment, you go to the mountains or something where there's a lower concentration of oxygen, then you will begin to produce EPO, to produce more red blood cells to more easily bind the oxygen, the little bit of oxygen that is present, right? Now, EPO can also be given in clinical settings for patients who are anemic, who have low red blood cell count, and they can also be used in sporting events, albeit illegally, in a process known as blood doping, right? Process known as blood doping. We'll talk about that whenever we do blood. We also have the liver. The liver produces things called, or a hormone called angiotensinogen. And anytime you see, just as a hint, anytime you see this ending ogen, O-G-E-N, that means it's inactive, right? That means it's an inactive form of the active molecule, right? So this angiotensinogen is converted into what's called angiotensin 1, and then angiotensin 1 is converted into angiotensin 2, and angiotensin 2 helps to stimulate blood vessel constriction, and lots of other processes that help to promote an increase in blood pressure. Whenever we do cardiovascular system, whenever we do urinary system, and we talk about the regulation of fluid in our blood, and we talk about the regulation of blood pressure, we'll come back to this angiotensinogen system, right, or this angiotensin system. Another one is our our stomach and small intestine. Stomach is going to secrete a hormone called gastrin, and gastrin promotes an increase in gastric activity, so for digestive processes. And then the small intestine, also part of the digestive system, is secreting hormones called secretin and cholecystokinin. And cholecystokinin is a main one, and this is helping to promote the release of bile from our gallbladder. So anytime you see this term cholecys here, right, this kind of prefix here, that means gallbladder. And then kinin, so think like kinetic energy, right, the energy of movement. So it's helping promote the movement or the release of bile. Right. We also have our skin, right? So you may not think of the skin as having a role in the endocrine system, but with that vitamin D that we mentioned earlier when we talked about PTH, we make vitamin D, or active vitamin D, called calcitriol, ultimately from cholesterol in our skin, right? And that is done so in the presence of ultraviolet light, right? So we have to have UV light to help convert that cholesterol ultimately into vitamin D and to active calcitriol. And then that calcitriol is going to help to do a number of things that help to increase blood calcium levels. So stimulates calcium release from the bone, decreases its loss in the urine, and stimulates calcium reabsorption or absorption in the small intestines, right? And then kind of the last main tissue that has anything to do with the endocrine system is our fat, right? Is adipose tissue, right? And it's going to produce one hormone called leptin, and this helps to regulate some of our food intake, right? And helping us to feel feelings of satiation, right? So in other words, the feeling of feeling full, right? Now, there are variations in leptin receptors in which individuals are less responsive to leptin, so they do not feel the feeling of satiety, of feeling full, like other individuals do. And so this has significant implications on appetite, on weight gain, right, and just overall health as well, right? So last thing here that I want to mention is how the endocrine system changes as we age, right? So like many things, as we age, it begins to decrease, it slows down, if you will, right? So the secretion of various hormones is affected. The efficiency, the production of the hormones is also affected as well. And then we typically have just decreased levels of hormones in general, right? So growth hormone, sex hormones, thyroid hormones, all of these typically wane and decrease as we age. All right, so we will stop there, and this concludes our endocrine system lecture. Please reach out if you have any questions.